All right, y'all, we're back. Hilda Labrada Gore is today's guest, and she's somebody that I've been tracking for a very long time. She's the host of the Wise Traditions podcast, which is a part of the Weston A. Price Foundation. And if you've been listening to the show long enough, you know that I talk a lot about Weston A. Price. Sally Fallon Morell, the head of the Weston A. Price, is an author of some of my favorite books. Dr. Thomas Cowan has co-authored many of those books. So much great material there. Nourishing Traditions is a must-have, and I've said it many times. If you're parenting or you're about to be a parent, the Nourishing Traditions book of baby and child care is the Bible on organic, natural remedies for anything that your kid might go through, and also really what to put in their body that gives them the most robust, beautiful immune system on the planet. One thing I've loved about Hilda Gore is that she has not shied away from speaking the truth or having guests on the podcast that, in the last 3 years really have put their neck on the line. I've loved that. Guests like Tom Cowan, guests like many other great people, authors, people that see the world a little differently than the mainstream narrative. And even against, all the shit one may take, she has stood tall for what she understands to be the truth about health and wellness and where we fit into that picture. She is an incredible person. I had no idea the depth of her story and what made her into the person that she is today, but y'all know the arc of this podcast. I love the background. I want to figure out what made people them, and hers is fucking fantastic. Like, it's a really, really beautiful and amazing and inspiring story. I love what she does. I love that she travels the world. She's kind of known as the Dora the Explorer 2.0, travels the world exploring ancestral wisdom for the benefit of humanity. She's a content creator. She communicates with the best of experts, experiences, and epic adventures on the Wise Traditions podcast. Her holistic Hilda YouTube channel at conferences, events, and ancestral tours and retreats covers a ton of shit. And she goes and spends time, like my brother Monsell Denton from Sacred Hunting. She will go and spend time with different indigenous groups and glean everything she can from their elders and figure out how they live, and much in the way that Weston A. Price did in the 1930s. And we dive into that as well. If you're not familiar with Weston A. Price, don't worry, we won't leave you hanging. But she has followed in his footsteps, and she's also reconnected to herself and her own ancestors and is starting to carve her own path. It's incredible. I love her dearly. I will gladly have her back on this podcast again in the future. And I get to go on her podcast coming up here. So we'll link to that in a while. This will release before I'm on their podcast, but down the road, I'll be sure to mention that to everybody because I can't wait. I'll be on a It's nice to be on a podcast where you get to sit among other awesome people that have been on that show before. And I highly recommend that show for people to listen to. A lot of the episodes are shorter, 20 to 40 minutes, and they just cut right to the chase and dive deeply. And I really love that about their podcast because I don't always have time for an hour, and I certainly don't always have time for 3-hour podcasts, even though I make time for Rogan on occasion, and I certainly do for Living 4D with Paul Chek. Without further ado, Hilda Labrada Gore. Holistic Hilda, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. I've been a fan of you from the Wise Traditions podcast. I was looking up some of your bio and realized that we were probably bumping into shoulders at Paleo FX back in the day when we were speaking. That was going on. That was such a good run and such a wealth of knowledge there. But yeah, I've been listening. I've been wanting to get you on the podcast. You've had so many great guests on it. Really, when I think about the last 3 years, you could say in a negative way, like, well, people showed their colors or that kind of stuff. But I love people who stayed true to their knowledge and true to the ancestral wisdom. And I feel like a lot of people from our background in food did. They could kind of see through the lies and things like that. But I just love that you guys didn't bat an eye with your guests, and you'd bring people on and say, hey, we don't know if this is true or not, but we're still going to have the podcast anyways. And so big applause for that. You guys have been great. You've been known as the Dora the Explorer 2.0. You travel the world, you get into really, really cool things, and you share that ancient ancestral wisdom with the world. And a lot of the times, that's just as pertinent. I think a lot of futurists and people will argue, don't fall in love with the past. The present's never been better, that kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, to an extent. And at the same time, we can't forget what worked, and we can't forget what's worked generationally and really the medicine that's behind that from our food and the way we grow it and everything else in between. So I've been babbling here for a minute now. Tell me what made you. What got you into everything that you're doing? You live such an awesome life, getting to travel and meet really incredible people. But what drove you to Weston A. Price Foundation, and what drove you to all the work that you're doing now?
Oh my gosh, Kyle, it is so fascinating. It's and unexpected. What I'm going to tell you right now is that my destiny was set before I was born. And while that might sound really dramatic, it's because I kind of had a dramatic entry into the world. Basically, I was born with a birth defect. And even before I came on the scene, the doctors told my mother, "We think your child is going to have a serious birth defect," because my mother was exposed to the German measles and she was low in vitamin A. And if you don't have sufficient vitamin A when you're pregnant, it can lead to birth defects. Now, they didn't know what I was going to have wrong. They said your child might be born deaf or unable to speak, unable to see. We don't know. But they actually recommended she not even have me altogether. But thankfully, my mom stuck to her guns, or to her faith, I will say, and was like, "I'm having this baby." So I've always valued the preciousness of life. Let me just start there. And then the fact that I was born with a defect, but it was able to be repaired. Basically, I had a hole in my heart. It was between the lower two ventricles and the heart. So blood was flowing in a direction it shouldn't be flowing. It wasn't oxygenating properly. I'm what they dubbed a blue baby. So I wasn't getting everything I needed from this defect. And so then they were monitoring me for years. And when I was 9 years old, they performed open heart surgery. And that was really scary for a little kid. I remember the night before the surgery, God bless them, my parents went to the movies to get their mind off their troubles. And I was alone in the hospital room. And a nurse came in and she's like, "Okay, it's time for your enema." And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Nobody told you what that is?" I was like, "No." You know, in my little voice, oh my gosh. Now people wonder why I don't do coffee enemas, but I still have some trauma surrounding that. One day I'll rectify it. But in the meantime, it was very scary. And then, they put me under. I didn't know what was going to happen. The next day they put me under and they just literally cracked me open, put my body on ice, which I suspect has made me get into cold adaptation as an adult now because they kind of froze me so that they could work on the heart. And in some way, subconsciously, I equate cold with healing. But I digress. So they did that. They froze me, they sewed up the heart, they put it back in me, and then they said, "You can do whatever you want." Until that time, I was kind of an uncertain, shaky kind of kid in terms of my body confidence. I didn't know if my heart was going to keep up the good work or not. I've been monitored by the National Institutes of Health and so forth. I'd go to the amusement park and the signs would say, not for pregnant women or people with heart conditions. And I was like, uh-oh, is that me? Like I was nervous. And then I was told you can do whatever you want at 9. So the first thing I wanted to do, honestly, was to give thanks to God because I had the sense that I had a protective hand on me even when I was in the womb. And then that hand also guided the surgeon's skill, right? So I was like, okay, I'm definitely a person of faith now. The other thing I realized is I want to make my body last as long and stay as strong as possible. So I got into fitness. That was my entryway into this health field. And then as I got older, I realized, oh, I want to help other people be as healthy as possible too. So that's kind of what set the course for my getting involved in health and wellness. But I thought it was just going to be exercise, not even diet and exercise, just exercise. I was like, work it off, stay strong, go to the gym, lift weights, until a dear friend of mine got chronic fatigue and the doctors had no answers for her whatsoever. She didn't know what to do. So she started experimenting with diet and she was going with, vegetarianism and then other things and then macrobiotic. And she was eating so many carrots, she literally looked orange. It was crazy. And that's when she met the head of the Weston Price Foundation at a health fair. She ran into Sally Fallon Morell. And Sally was gracious enough not to comment on the color of my friend's orange skin. And she simply handed her a copy of her book, Nourishing Traditions. And she said to my friend, "You may want to read this." And that changed my good friend's life and consequently mine, because my friend started saying, it does matter what we eat. And she showed me that book and it just led me down the rabbit hole of understanding healthy traditions and ancestral wisdom in a way I never would have expected.
Yeah, it's mind blowing when you dive into that. I similarly started from fighting, which was a form of fitness. You got to be in shape to do that, and was really focused on just how do I build muscle and cut weight, like a lot of bodybuilders and things of that nature, and then I had a strength coach that turned me on to Paul Chek, and in How to Eat, Move, and Be Healthy, he has a huge section on Weston Price and his travels and what he came up with. And then Paul's great, he throws in, all the books and stuff that he learned from. So I just started rabbit holing Nourishing Traditions. I got the Nourishing Traditions book of baby and child care right when we were pregnant with our son Bear. And so much of that, it just rung true. Like it was like a soul yes, like the whole body's like, oh, okay, I'm in the truth right now. And it's really mind-blowing, like when you start to employ some of the practices that you get from that style of eating, and then how, when you actually nourish yourself, how different you think, where your emotional state ends up, how you sleep, like all these other things are affected by it. And Paul has the four doctors. He's got Dr. Movement, Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Happiness. But all those are predicated, they're all intertwined. It's not like one's in front of the other. But when you master one of those things like diet, everything else improves. It's really incredible. And I was so blown away. I remember at that point, this was post-college, I was like, I'm never reading a book again. I don't have to read a book again. I'm done. And I saw the Flatten Your Abs Forever video, and I was like, all right, I'll read his book. And then I read his book, and I was like, how much more can I learn from books? If this one thing could change my life, and that really renewed my love for learning. But yeah, there's so much, and she's been so incredible as well, and just a tremendous author in recent years, with everything going on. So and that's such an amazing thing that got you.
Totally. And then Sally, of course, points to Dr. Price himself and his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. Like, talk about mind-blowing. Even if you didn't read it, if you just looked at the pictures, he traveled the world. I know you know the story, Kyle, but he traveled over 10 years. He went to like 14 countries. His quest was to find untouched or isolated indigenous people groups and see what was making them so healthy, because he was in the dental field and a researcher in the 1930s, and he got National Geographic magazine. He could hardly believe his eyes. The people with the broad faces, with the good posture, with that strength and vitality that was emanating from the images. And he thought, I want to see them for myself, and I want to see what they're eating. And of course, being a dentist, he wanted to see what their teeth were like. So he went everywhere from Australia to the South Sea Pacific Islands to Scotland to Alaska. And what he found was, of course, the diets were very different, but the healthiest people were still eating their traditional diets, their traditional foods that were local, seasonal, and available where they were at. So in Alaska, it was like whale blubber and seal oil, and in Kenya, it was meat and milk and blood. And he examined the teeth. They had very few incidences of cavities, those who were on the traditional diets. And they were also just as hale and hearty and strong as they appeared in the National Geographic magazine pages. But he was also, this is the cool part of his work, he was able to contrast the people that were healthy and living their traditional ways with those who had departed from those ways, who were related. So you couldn't just say, oh, it's just genetics, the Maasai are naturally tall and lean and strong. No, he found people that had left their diets and started to include what he called the displacing foods of modern commerce. So white flour, refined sugar, vegetable oils, canned foods, including condensed milk and so forth. And he contrasted their health and their cavities and all the things. And of course, it started to deteriorate. So this is the basis of his foundational seminal work that he published in his book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And so when I first got excited about the Weston A. Price Foundation and came upon them through my friend, I was like, oh, I want to help them. I want to get the word out. Maybe I'll rework some brochures they have or something, because I'm like a writer, translator type person. And instead, I had the privilege of going to Kenya, because they said, we need 2 people to go for us to Kenya. A Maasai warrior had contacted them, and he had found some Weston Price stuff, the way you do, you just come across stuff. And he said, oh my gosh. He's like, I have diabetes. My wife has asthma. We're all getting sick. He literally was saying, we're all getting sick. Please send someone over. So I raised my hand when I found out about this, headed to Kenya, and I had the privilege of saying, don't eat the American way, for goodness sakes. Don't eat our way. Eat your way. Eat the way that served you for thousands and thousands of years. And their community, I went to this small village called Oithi on the border of Tanzania. they had begun to have sodas and the displacing foods of modern commerce, just like Dr. Price noted. And what Dr. Price noted, it doesn't just cause more infections and cavities, but the following generations would have a narrowing of their facial structure, so their teeth would be more crowded, and they would have worse vision and hearing and posture and behavior. And just to get back to your point, Kyle, of the difference nutrition can make, when Dr. Price came home to Ohio, he thought, let me just give kids one good meal. So he started cooperating with some schools in Ohio. I forget the exact place where he was at the time, but he said, let's just give them one good meal. It had bone broth based soups and stews, sourdough bread and butter, and raw milk. And do you know that the kids' grades improved and their behavior improved, and so much changed from that foundational meal that he was giving them in the middle of the day? So I agree with you. All these things work together. I mean, I've seen so many things in my travels, which I can't wait to tell you about. But let me just say that diet is super foundational for a healthy, happy life.
Yeah, that's so good. And you're right. It is the pictures where it's so undeniable. You know, you see side by sides and you see just the look of it. And it was interesting to me too. Like one of the things that Dr. Price points out is that a lot of these tribes, indigenous cultures, had no word for cancer. They had no word for heart disease. It didn't exist. And it didn't exist at a level where there was 0.0%. That's so they had never had a name for it because it actually wasn't around. It's not that they couldn't diagnose it. It didn't exist. I found that incredibly eye-opening. And two, you know, to survive without, you know, a toothbrush and toothpaste and floss and all the things that we require. And they have just perfect teeth. They almost look fake, you know, and these wide skulls with the airways. I had a holistic dentist on the podcast who was awesome. He was talking about mouth formation and all these things. But yeah, when your mouth's crowded, I mean, you're getting sleep apnea, you're snoring, you're doing all the modern problems, right? So much there where it was just like, holy shit, this is all tied together. Like this is wow. Like I had no idea. Yeah. And the generational piece that you alluded to is such a big one. You're familiar, I'm sure, with Pottinger's cats.
Yes. Oh,
you want to can you talk about that? Because this is such a great one too. And I don't think I've mentioned it on this podcast before.
All right. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know more about Price than Pottinger, but I believe he wanted to see if he changed the diet of a number of cats, what would happen to the next generation, to subsequent generations. And so he did. He gave some cats the raw food they're accustomed to, including raw milk, and others were deprived of it. They were still fed, but not the same diet that was necessary for cat growth and health. And it wasn't just that the cats got irritated or lost some fur when they weren't eating the right diet, but the next generation was sicker. And then the third generation couldn't even reproduce. And so it is very eye-opening and a lesson for us to pay attention to. People talk about the canary in the coal mine. We should talk about the cats. The cats, pay attention to the cats, because what happened to them is happening to us. You know, at every turn, there is a lack of fertility. There is aggression, anxiety, depression. We're having so many things, as you said, that couldn't even be named in the traditional tribes. But I do want to say this too. You were exhibiting a characteristic that I love, that I also embrace, which is that learner posture, that curiosity, that kind of insatiable longing to know more. I want to invite anyone listening to this, if you're listening right now, get curious about what's around you. Get curious about who you can learn from. Everybody in any given room knows something more than you do. You know, feel free to explore that. And especially from people from a different culture, or from a more, a culture that's still close to its indigenous roots. Why do I say this? Because in Dr. Price's book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, at one point, I think Dr. Price approached some Native Americans, some Indians, and he said, tell me the secret. You're not getting scurvy, and yet your diet doesn't include any fruits. You know, they were just eating mostly animal products. He's like, what's happening here? He was extremely curious. And they explained that they got the glands of the moose from a certain part of the animal, and that they divided it up between everyone, and that had vitamin C in it. I don't think they mentioned the vitamin C part, but obviously it had something that was helping them not get scurvy. And when Dr. Price said, why haven't you told the white man this? They said, the white man knows too much to ask us. And what they were saying is, he's too arrogant. She's too arrogant to approach and humble themselves before us to ask what we know that they don't. And so I think that's a word of caution for all of us. Whenever we think we've gotten it all sewed up, we may be wrong, and we need to be willing to be humble and lifelong learners.
That's such a beautiful point. Yeah, that's an incredible story, one that I hadn't remembered from his work. Well, so you had this first trip out to Kenya. I'm sure this is something now where you're just like, couldn't go any better. You're doing some awesome work, and that pretty much aligns you now with the Weston Price Foundation, and you just sent on travels from there. Talk about how you get to become this world traveler.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in part it was also a question of destiny. Like I said, I thought I'd help the foundation with a few brochures. But when I was in that village in Oiti in Kenya, I met an elder in the tribe, and he was so old, Kyle, he literally didn't know how old he was. They don't keep track. And he was walking with a little walking stick, and he came up to where I was staying. And I thought, oh my goodness. As they say, elders are like walking libraries. I thought, I have to interview this man. I hadn't even started the podcast, but I grabbed my phone. I pushed voice memo record and like started through a translator asking him questions. What do you eat? What did you eat as a child? What was your health like? I thought, I need to learn as much as I can through this man. And this is what he said. We ate whatever we could catch. Like literally, they're hunters, you know, it was whatever wild game they could catch, they would eat. And then he said, maybe some wild honey and fruit, but mostly whatever we could catch. And then I said, well, what was your health like? And he said, we never got sick. We never got sick. He said, if we ever felt a shiver coming on, like maybe under the weather, he didn't use that term, but when we felt a shiver, he said, we would drink milk from the cow, and he demonstrated getting it straight from the udder. I was like, oh my goodness. And then he said, and now they say cold is coming and my grandchildren have to wear jackets. He said, we didn't have jackets. And now they say disease is coming and they say we have to get shots. We didn't have shots. And so I was just blown away listening to this man. So many stories, more stories I could tell you from that. But the bottom line is when I returned, I immediately went to Sally and I said, we've got to lift up these voices. And you all already know so many authors and health experts in this alternative field. Maybe we can do something, a show. And to my surprise, she said yes. And I only say to my surprise because I don't even know if at the time she knew what a podcast was. Not many people did, you know, about 8 years ago. So she said yes. And we took off. And it makes me so happy because we have lifted up some indigenous voices. It's not always easy to get microphones and cameras in these remote places, you know, and that did kind of become a launching pad for getting this information out, but for me too. So the foundation did tell me, they're like, Hilda, we can't keep sending you places as much as you'd love to go. I was like, send me here, send me there. And then I realized, oh, if this is on my heart, and I do feel it's my mission to be like Dora the Explorer 2.0, you know, to explore the world, uncovering ancient health traditions, to restore the energy and vitality of humanity. I find this so compelling, then the money will come. I've got to trust that the money will come. So, you know, I reached out to a couple of companies that I trusted that would maybe support my work and to, you know, people who believe in the mission and maybe don't have a way to give. So anyway, so I started a GoFundMe or a Patreon or something. Anyway, so I've kind of self-funded some of these trips. And honestly, even though sometimes like the trip to Ethiopia and Mongolia, they clear my bank account, I'm like, you know what? It's worth it. Because it's not about the money, is it, Kyle? Like we're doing this not because we're trying to become, you know, a big fish in a small pond or you know, the next Joe Rogan or whatever. We're just simply vehicles of, you know, lifting up what we find to be true and that we hope will resonate with others and change their life for the better. I'm really, really compelled. And I did think, I'll just tell you one last thing here. When I was in Australia, I thought, okay, I'm following in the footsteps of Dr. Price. At first I was like, okay, Kenya, Peru, Ecuador, Australia. Let me just keep going to places where I know Dr. Price has been. And in Australia, in front of a crowd that included, you know, some Aboriginal people, I said to them, you know, I'm following in the footsteps of Dr. Price. And this Aboriginal woman named Auntie Siv, I'll never forget it. She said to me over dinner at the table, she said, you're not following in the footsteps of Dr. Price. And I was like, shocked. She said, you're doing what your ancestors have called you to do. You are a First Nation person. Welcome home. That moved me so much because it rang true. because I was always wondering, what's a Latina doing following the footsteps of this Canadian dentist guy? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And then I realized, oh, she's right. This is bigger than me. And so I'm extremely gratified because it is a privilege to sit next to an indigenous person who's still living according to their traditional ways and learn from them. At first I thought, oh, I'm just going to go and talk about Dr. Price. Sometimes I do get that opportunity, but more often than not, I simply get to learn and experience another way of approaching good health. And it's fascinating and life-changing for me and for those who get to benefit from it.
Yeah, it's so incredible. And I think, to your point on the learning, it's not like there's one that Weston Price didn't find, one universal diet. Like you mentioned, with the Inuit, they were mostly seal blubber and whale blubber, right? And it's very little carbohydrate. If they did, it would be, some wild berries that would grow for a couple months in the summertime. And that's it. 10 months of the year, they're going back to the blubber. And then I think there was a pygmy tribe in Africa that was mostly sweet potatoes or yams, like 90%, and then grubs and bugs, kind of like Timon and Pumbaa for their protein source, So those are pretty opposite end of the spectrum, when you think about that, yet both had phenomenal health and both were eating according to where they are. I think, you can oversimplify things, but if you look at, the polar regions, a mixed diet, or, the equatorial regions, that's an easy way to kind of break that down. And obviously everyone's unique and it takes some more investigation on what exactly is going to do good for us. But that is such a cornerstone piece. What are some of the other cornerstone pieces that you found along your way in visiting all these people? Because I think that it's something you can grab onto where, like, I'll never eat the same again. It doesn't mean I won't have an occasional deep dish pizza on my son's birthday or something like that. But 99.9% of the time, I've changed the way that I eat. And I think any of these other lessons would be super pertinent for this podcast.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I have definitely a lot of ancestral secrets I want to share, but also I can say this. The foundation has 11 principles. They're dietary principles for people to take as they wish. As you said, there's bioindividuality. We're different ethnically. We live in different locales. So it's important to pay attention to what's going to serve us best. But these principles include things that Dr. Price noticed as commonalities among these different dietary indigenous people groups. So number one is to avoid overly processed and denatured foods. And that just means avoid the stuff in the packages and the shiny little things, even if it says, natural or paleo. You're just better off eating more whole, real foods, single ingredient foods, as my friend Cindy O'Meara calls it. Like, so meat, eggs, fish, butter, simple. It's like one word, not a long list of stuff on any package. If it is packaged or you get it from your farmer, better still, there's a vibrancy that comes from eating food that's alive. And I've seen this wherever I've gone. Yeah, pretty much everywhere I've gone. The food that's on the supermarket shelves, they intend to make it shelf stable and have a long life there. And I say, if that's the intention, it gives you a short life. So avoid the things that last forever on the shelves. It's going to shorten yours. I mean, I have so many stories about this. I think of when I went to Peru and I got to go to some mountains outside of Cusco. And there were some school children there. Their faces were so broad, like what Dr. Price saw, They're 2 hours, 3 hours away, a huge mountain ride up the hill to be with them. And their faces were broad. Their cheeks were ruddy, not from eczema or, some rash, but from the beautiful sunlight that they were getting. Their families were still farming. And in their little snack area, because it was a school I visited, they had stuff from the government. It was like little packages of like protein mix, let's say, but the first ingredient was literally corn syrup. I remember vividly that corn syrup and soybean oil were in those packages. And next to that, they had chicken feet. Chicken feet. Like that was part of their traditional diet, like chew on that baby, get the collagen, get the stuff, the gristle stuff that we would turn our noses up at. But that's a real food. That's a real something right from where you're at that you're going to benefit from. The collagen, the glycine, the stuff that's in there that they could gnaw out of it. I don't chew on chicken feet myself because I've got a more westernized palate. But let me tell you this. when I travel the world, I do my best to accept what I'm served with gratitude. And they're not serving me Hot Pockets. They are serving me good, real foods most of the time that I simply am unaccustomed to. When I was in Mongolia just last November, no, yes, it was just last November. The Kazakh eagle hunter that I was with, believe it or not, I can hardly believe it when I say that, they had just roasted like a goat, and he brought the head to the table, and he was digging out the brains and handing them to me. I said thank you and ate them. Not that I'm accustomed to eating brains, but I know that they prized the organ meats, and they still do. The traditional peoples know that it's not about what satisfies the palate, it's about what nourishes the body. So this is one thing also that impressed me about Mongolia, and it's actually principle number 3 of the Wise Traditions diet, is nutrient density. Get the most bang for your buck. There's a reason people buy a bag of potato chips or Takis and eat the whole thing. It's not because they lack willpower. It's because their body's saying, this tastes like food or cheese or something that's going to nourish, but the nourishment hasn't come yet, so keep going. Your body's doing the right thing, and your mind is telling you subconsciously, keep going, because I'm waiting for the good stuff to come. But in contrast, when you eat something that's genuinely nourishing, like liver or, a grass-fed, pastured pork chop or what have you, like it's so satisfying. It still has the fat, and you don't have to season it much to make it good. And you're not going to want to eat a whole bag of chips because your body is saying, thank you, that was good enough. So this idea of nutrient density, I think, would be a good one for us to get back to. And that's a beautiful thing I've noticed everywhere around the world too, is that they eat the whole animal. They use the bones for broth. They eat the liver and the organ meats because they know that they're more nutrient rich than the muscle meat. I could go on and on, but I just feel like those two things, those two principles are key: avoiding processed foods and eating more nutrient rich foods.
I love that. It's funny thinking of the chicken feet. I remember when I first got into making my own bone broth, I was I was having a hard time getting it to be gelatinous. And I was using really good regenerative bones and knuckles and different things like that. And like, there's plenty of collagen in here. Why isn't this thing getting the way that I want it to? And somebody's like, have you tried chicken feet? It's like, oh, really? And they're like, oh yeah. And so the second I got like a pound of chicken feet, it was like Jello. I was like, oh wow, this is night and day. Like, it's a whole different ball game. Totally. And a little easier to consume than gnawing on them. But I'd be down to try that. That'd be cool.
I know I should have gotten some, but it didn't occur to me at the time. What's funny though, because you were talking about how diets vary around the world and depending on where you're at, they do eat a lot of quinoa. And I think, oh my gosh, yes, when I was with those school children, they offered me like a fermented soup. They say it's like penicillin in terms of its antibiotic properties, like a healthy antibiotic, not against, the biome, but like working synergistically with the biome. And it was some kind of fermented quinoa potato soup. And wow, that took some getting used to. So I just ate a little bit. And I was like, oh, I'm a small person, which is true. I only have room for so much. And then they gave me some in a to-go cup. And I was like, thank you, I think. But really, it's an honor and a privilege to see how people eat and to be reminded of how we used to eat. Like, I've interviewed Dr. Bill Schindler. I don't know if you know him. He's fascinating. He wrote a book called Eat Like a Human. And he's here on the Eastern Shore in Maryland, not far from where I'm at. And he just says, the question is not what should we eat, that we often think, what should we eat? What should we eat? It's like, he's like, how should we eat it? It's about preparing it properly so that the nutrients are more bioavailable, so that the anti-nutrients are neutralized or diminished. So, for example, I'm not afraid of a good sourdough bread. I'm not a fan of most breads because the gluten is kind of intolerable. No wonder people are gluten intolerant, right? It's the way they process it, and it's also the glyphosate that they spray on it that can irritate the gut. But a good sourdough where it's had time to ferment, like, that's bread that's neutralized some of the negative stuff and made more bioavailable what nutrients are available. Like, and it tastes so good with some butter. Oh, don't get me started. But anyway, so I think those principles are really important. And then to go back to the Peruvian children real quick, I've kind of witnessed these ancestral secrets, as I said, and one of them is the sun. I talked about the sun on their cheeks. Some of their homes and the places I've gone have no electricity. So what? They rise with the sun. Their circadian rhythms are in sync with nature. They're in harmony with their surroundings, and they get the benefits of that early morning sun. I went from night owl to morning bird, if that's a thing, early bird, I guess, when I started getting the sunrise sun. I don't mean I got up like right at the crack of dawn, and let's say it was at 5:45. I would get up and get the sun in my eyes within 30 to 45 minutes of sunrise. And when I did that, it made every clock and every cell in my body sync up with nature. And so I got tired earlier and I had more energy from the sun. There's no UVA or UVB in the spectrum, so it kind of feeds you in a different way, the spectrum of light in those early morning hours. It was good for my metabolism, my energy. I could go on, but it made me this like quantum health girl, as Jack Kruse would say, a black swan. I really got into it and I've never looked back. My husband scoffed at me at first, and now he's like, oh my gosh, you are an early bird. I love it so much. And so it's something that I've had to kind of biohack or be intentional about, but it's something I've witnessed among people in Peru, in Mongolia, in Ethiopia, and other places of the earth too. So the sun is one of the huge overlooked secrets. It's right above our head, kind of right in front of our noses, and we really shouldn't miss it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're building our house right now on a regenerative farm down in Lockhart, and one of the things, like the western wall faces the sunset, and it's great because we're up high, so we've got this, right on the, nothing's blocking us on the horizon. But in the east, it's like we got a lot of trees there. So how do we get up? So we did a little star deck just literally for the sunrise, and it's cool at night, but I want to see the sunrise every morning. And we had Matt Maruka on the podcast, who's a Jack Kruse understudy and just a phenomenal young man, a wealth of knowledge. And he was big into that too. And the thing that I noticed in particular about watching sunrise was it changed my neurochemistry. It's almost like an ice bath first thing in the morning. The whole rest of the day, I felt better. Like it was like, it's a noticeable, like, oh shit, I'm good. No matter what happens today, I'm good because I got to watch the sunrise. It's very lifting and it lasts a long time. It's not like, I saw the sunrise. Cool. Now I got to do emails. It's like, no, I saw the sunrise. I can do anything that's necessary today.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I love Matt. He is so brilliant. And he's only like 23. I'm like, what the heck? But guess what? He was driven by curiosity. I don't know if you know the story, how he snuck into Jack Kruse's talk. He didn't have a ticket. It was expensive. I forget what part of the world it was. And Jack loved it. Jack was like, come on. And he kind of took him under his wing because he's like, this kid wants to know. I'm going to teach him everything I know. So powerful stuff. But yeah, in Mongolia, they wake up with the sun to milk the yaks. In Ethiopia, they told me, I saw some tribes this past summer. They said, we have a kind of sunrise coffee ceremony. They said, we get together in our village and we share coffee. It's like 2 hours that we're talking. And so get this, they're doing all the things. They get the sunrise, they have community, they're grounding, like all at the same time. It was so powerful. I wasn't a part of the coffee ceremony, though they did offer me some later, but they were telling me this is what we do every day. I was like, wow, good stuff.
That's super cool. I haven't been. I've been through the airport in Ethiopia, but I haven't spent much time in the country. But one thing I noticed was everyone was friendly there. I was like, this is almost like it's odd. It's a feeling I got in Thailand and some other countries where like big smiles. I was like, damn, this is cool. And I don't know how. Obviously it was my time in the airport, but it seemed like all the locals were genuinely happy. Like they seemed, and on the airplane, on the flight too, all the flight attendants that were from there, like, are you guys from different countries or Ethiopia? And they're like, all Ethiopia, and they were all awesome. They were so much fun. I was like, that speaks to something about a culture as well.
I think so too. One challenge I'll just share with you, because I love that yours is a long form podcast, so we can say as much as we want. So my friend Mary Reddick and I were traveling together, and we had a local guide, and almost straight out of the gate, he said to us, our country is very needy. There's just a lot of need, and he goes, I'm trying to set up a system to support kids so they can go to school. And most Westerners would be like, oh, school, notebooks and pencils for the kids and shoes. But because I've traveled so much of the world and because I've seen that education doesn't just teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, as they say, but it inculcates a culture and sometimes a shame against the traditional cultures and languages, I was a little hesitant. And still to this day, I'm in touch with this guy, but I'm like, I don't know how to tell him that the tribes I saw are beautiful. Like, why are we trying to westernize them with our method of education when the younger children can learn from the elders in the tribe? Like, I don't know. And maybe I'm taking it too far, but shoes keep them from grounding. Schools keep them away from their families and the community in which they're grown. And it's inculcating, again, not just skills for getting a modern job, but it's inculcating a different way of seeing the world. And probably when they're done, they'll go away to the city, leave the village so that they can provide for their family. But what if they already have everything they need? These are the kinds of questions I wrestle with at times.
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. I'm sure you've read Deschooling Society by Ivan Illich.
I haven't.
Oh God, you will love it. It's a short read. It's absolutely incredible. Dr. Thomas Cowan recommended it to me, and I loved every page of it. But it's mind blowing, and it will put in verse of what you think of education, from a modern standpoint, and also really alludes to what happens to indigenous cultures, when they're only schooled to grade 5, or when, like, Native Americans had to stay in school for 12 years, but they just repeated the 3rd grade. That's in John Fire Lame Deer Secret of Visions book. You made it a 3rd grade and you repeated 3rd grade for however many years, right? So then when you have a minimum education requirement for college or a minimum education requirement for a job, sorry, you don't have the minimum education requirement. And that was done on purpose, and all over the world. They did it in Peru. They did it in a lot of places. So that will help. It's like a modern caste system that everyone agrees upon. And, my main qualm is that you're not taught how to think, you're taught what to think, right, in education. And I think that's such a big piece of the equation. If we all really think about that, we're not taught what to think, or how to think, rather. We're taught what to think. Like, this is what you memorize. This is what you need to know. And that's not even cross-referencing that against a place where there is indigenous wisdom, where there are elders, where there are people, wisdom keepers that hold that lineage. And, I've had quite a few experiences with plant medicines. I've been fortunate enough to make my way to the Amazon in different locations. And a lot of those indigenous cultures run into the same issues. Kids see an iPhone or they see a TV and they say, "No, I want to go to the city now. I want to get out of here. All this old medicine stuff is crap. I have no interest in it. I don't want to carry that lineage." And there's a lot of places, even amongst the Amazonians, where that's an issue, from Brazil to Peru to Ecuador, where that's continuing to be an issue. So my hope is that even if people do want an education, that they still can come back and marry those two, the wisdom lineage of their ancestors with the modern education.
Yeah, maybe you're giving me a lot to think about. And you're the first person that I've taken notes on when I was the guest on their show, but I wrote down the name of that book. I will definitely check it out. I think you're exactly right. There may be a way in which the beautiful treasures of traditional wisdom are not lost. I'll have to talk to my guide more about that. What kind of school are we talking here? But the reason I think I was also a little hesitant is because when I interviewed that Maasai warrior elder, that first time when I grabbed my phone and hit voice memo, I said to him, "Why do you think there's been this shift, that we need to get shots and jackets and all the things? Why has there been this shift in health also?" And he said, "Education." That was his answer, education. And so that's why I'm like, oh, red flag, what are they educating and what are they inculcating in our young people? I have his words sometimes ringing in my ears about that.
Yeah, that hits home for sure. Well, continue on the path here, please. This is awesome. I'm loving every second of this.
Oh, good. Well, gosh, let me think where I can continue too. I'm going to take us back actually to the Mongolians. They really blew me away with their strength and resilience. And if there's something we need today, Kyle, it's resilience. I think we're too easily offended. Somebody said something on social media. Let me go home and eat some ice cream to comfort myself. I don't even know, but we've turned into these, we're virtual cowards, dare I say, that we're willing to kind of fire shots, in social media. But when we come face to face with someone, we're not going to say anything because we're scared. But, we have the anonymity of the screen, which I think sometimes protects us. But I digress with all that. What I want to get to is my Mongolian friends. Was that where I was headed? Yeah.
Yep.
Strength and resilience. Oh, my goodness. Yes, we're building resilience. And part of it is body confidence. You started out in that fighting world. I did too. And it's like there's something that comes with movement that is irreplaceable. And benefits us on so many levels. You can even hear my voice is getting stronger as I'm increasing my posturing and my intensity as we're talking here. I was so impressed. So I had the privilege of going to Western Mongolia and being with some Kazakh eagle hunters. They're nomadic people, so they've got to move their gurs or their yurts from time to time. In the winter, they go to more sheltered areas. It's a very sparsely populated, harsh land out there. And not only do they move their gurs, but they take care of their animals. They often have yaks or camels, horses, and so forth. And so they've got to have the strength to manage all of that and mend fences and all the things they do. Actually, I didn't see many fences, so maybe they're not mending fences. The animals can go wherever they want because there's no place for them to get away to. It's just all open land. It's crazy. But another way I saw their strength was with the eagle hunting itself. So what they do is they use eagles to hunt for prey for food and fur. So they train the eagles much like a falconer might do in the US or in different parts of the world. They get the little eaglet when he's under a year old from the nest, and then they put a little hood on it and teach it to recognize its master's voice, and they give it bits of rabbit or this or that. And then they train it to come down, and I got to witness this with Askar's family, actually. They would let the eagle go up the mountain to a certain part. Someone would release the eagle there, take the hood off, and he would fly down to where one of Oscar's daughters would be dangling some rabbit meat, and it would swoop down as she called it. And then her job at that moment was to put the little hood back on and the little thing around his ankle, his little webbed foot there. And then so they keep working with it until it can go great distances. And again, get the prey, which could be a wolf or a rabbit or a fox for the fur and the food. And it was amazing to watch, but also to let an eagle perch on my arm. So when I did that, I thought, oh my goodness, I have some more strength training to do because those eagles, the female eagles that they use are huge. And it must have weighed like 40 pounds. And just to hold it like this for a few minutes was a lot of work. And they do this all the time as they train the eagles. So yeah, I was blown away by those people. And now I understand in greater part why the Mongolians are known for being a conquering people, of expanding their empires and territory over the centuries, because they are strong and resilient. And part of it is the movement, and part of it is the diet. And what do they eat there? It's mostly meat and fat and dairy products, because all they have is like their yaks and their camels and their horses, because hardly anything grows, not enough for people to eat, for goodness sakes. So they eat what from the animals. And it was beautiful and amazing and heavy, which I guess is what they need there too, because it's cold. So anyway, it was a marvelous experience, and I'm so thankful for what they taught me about strength and resilience.
Yeah, it seems like one of the hardest places to be. I have a good friend of mine, Monsell Denton, who does sacred hunting, and he's a guide and really cool. He also ventures to different places to work with different tribes and their hunting skills. And I think he was in the Gobi Desert. Is that the one in Mongolia? Yeah. And he said like they did bloodletting of the camel for a little bit to drink some of the warm blood when they were running low. They had curdled milk products, which basically sustained them and were, fermented and obviously very good for them. But yeah, he said it was like you look around and it's like it's hard to believe that a culture can be there. I do that in Vegas, and I went to school at Arizona State, and you look around, and you're like, man, if there wasn't a city here, what would people do? I know indigenous cultures lived here, but it's pretty sparse, And then you think about that in contrast to the Gobi, and it's like there's two different, they're completely different leagues. Like one's a different planet, so it's such a vastly different ecosystem,
100%, 100%. Yeah, and about the bloodletting, yeah, blood and milk are also taken in there in Ethiopia. I found definitely in Kenya, and I know in Mongolia. I actually didn't witness the blood there, but I did drink some fermented horse milk, I think it was. Yes, because they're doing what they can with their food and even making it more bioavailable, since there's not easy ways to store things, right? So it's like, oh, it ferments when you leave it out. Okay, great. We'll drink it anyway. And then it has a little alcohol to it. So party over here. Wow.
Well, where'd you head to next in your travels, or where next down this list of the top 11 that you want to cover?
Well, two great questions. Let's go with the principles. I will say that, speaking of blood, one of the principles, the last one, is actually that all indigenous cultures prepared for pregnancy and conception, both the man and the woman. And as we alluded to earlier, there is a big problem with fertility right now. And so people, they can't just like get off birth control and in a snap expect to get pregnant. It doesn't work like that. Your body needs to be at its healthiest. It needs to be a prime environment for life to be nurtured. So Dr. Price noticed that even people, let's say in the highlands of Peru, would come down to the coast to get fish eggs, and they would dry them in the sun, and then they would take them back up to where they lived. And when he asked them, why are you doing this? They said, so that we can have babies. And I'm not sure they would say, oh, well, we know the fish eggs have vitamin A, which is good for fertility. But they knew what to do instinctively, and these traditions have been passed down. And also when I was in Ecuador, no, actually it was Peru. When I was in Peru, I met with some young moms, and they said, oh, yes, our grandmothers have told us and our mothers have told us to drink blood for fertility. And again, these things may seem out there to some, but I think we would do well to realize that preparing our bodies ahead of time is a good idea. And a prenatal vitamin probably isn't going to cut it. Most of those are made with synthetic vitamins. So we need to look for real foods that are rich in vitamin A to make the womb a hospitable place. And again, I said both the man and the woman were doing what they could to prepare for conception. So the man needs to be strong and fertile, getting his feet on the ground, eating foods that nourish that vibrant health that we all hope for, so that the next generation can be well. As I become more and more of an elder myself, I'm passionate about helping young people have children and to make sure that the next generation is well. And it's scary out there, Kyle. Sometimes when I look at the kids, I'll tell you a quick story. This was in my hometown of DC here. I was in a dog park. I've got a dog, and chatting with the person on the bench next to me. And this woman was saying, I work at a school, and I'm a teacher, and the kids in the classroom have been so out of control lately. They just haven't been taking their meds. And I said, well, what grade do you teach? And she said, second grade. Second grade. It makes me want to cry if I really, really let it sink into my spirit. She was talking about the kids needing stuff against depression and having to meet with their counselor and their ADD. And I was just aghast. And I know that is normal, but I mean, let me switch it. That is common, but it's not normal. Normal is what's healthy and good and our birthright, which is good health. But what's common is the opposite now. Little kids wearing glasses, little kids on meds, little kids seeing counselors, people depressed. And it's just, we weren't meant for that. And I think if we look back to some of the ancestral secrets I've mentioned, we can re-energize our spirits. One is the sun, as I mentioned. Another is sustenance, which we've discussed. But I also will say spirit matters a lot. Some of the groups I visit are really communities, and they're so tight-knit. When I was with the Hammer tribe, there were only like 300 people in that village, and their little huts were all close together. When they have a meal, they go and share it with each other. There's not a sense of this is mine and I hope you get yours later because we came home with a kill and you didn't. No, there's an abundance mindset, and it's so beautiful, and it's something we long for in our Western world. And I think we just need to, just like you and I work out, like we need to be intentional about community. Find your people. Find people who feel as you do, that meat is good for you and the sun is good, and we don't need to protect ourselves from it, and that we need to go back to some of these traditions, and that's what's going to really lift your spirit. I am a person of faith. I find much encouragement in my Christian faith, and at church, that's a community too. But I love my health-minded friends. Like I have several groups because we need each other more than ever. And I'll tell you a quick story about community in Ecuador. When I went down there, it was the time of Inti Raymi, which I looked up online is like this sun worship festival. And of course, don't believe everything you read online. It was much more than that. It was really almost a festival of Thanksgiving, I would say. They were grateful for the sun and the harvest, and they had dances that they did traditionally to celebrate the gifts of nature. I'll put it that way. But at one point, Christina, this woman I met, said to me, in 2020, a lot of us in our community got sick with COVID, whatever that is. And she said, what we did was some women and I gathered traditional plants and some traditional healing medicine And we took it to each household that had been affected by the sickness. And it was like 20 medicinal plants and herbs, she said. And they took them to every household. And she said, Kyle, not one person was hospitalized and no one died. And my first thought was, can I see the list of the herbs and the plants? Because I'm really curious. Of course, I am curious. But then my second thought was, oh my gosh, Hilda, it wasn't the plants and herbs in and of themselves necessarily. Think about the context in which those were delivered. It was a context of communal support and love. That probably did much more than even those traditional plant medicines could do. So it was a lesson for me to realize, that community, that is invaluable for our spirits.
Yeah, that's so true. And what a sharp contrast from being quarantined, not allowed. Like seeing nothing broke my heart more than seeing an elderly person with a mask on behind glass, looking at their partner through the glass, trying to touch hands through glass and not being able to touch one another. I can't think of a worse way to go than that, without having human contact. And we are creatures of contact. Like I forget which countries it was through World War II, but the countries where they talk about the orphans not having enough touch, and now literally kids died without affection, right? And we overlook that as such an important piece. It's such an important piece of our existence, and we only get that through community. We get that through the people that we love. A perfect stranger, especially in today's day, is not going to come up and give you a nice, warm, genuine hug. It's going to be from the people that we know and care about.
That's right. And I'm thinking about what my friend Mary Ruddick, she's been a partner in a couple of the travels we've done. She's like, look at these people, Hilda. She always tells me they're all over each other all the time. It's not just the occasional hug. The children were crawling onto our laps when we were sitting in a hut among the Hammer tribe, but they're doing life together. And I think that's why some people in the U.S. I know now are trying to set up like parallel societies, for lack of a better word. They're trying to come up with intentional communities where they can live among people who believe in regenerative farming. They don't think cows are trying to kill the climate. And, they're really like-minded in a lot of ways. And I think there's something beautiful about that. I see that because we do need that touch and doing life together. If there is a mom listening who's like, oh my gosh, I want this so much because I come home from work and I feed the baby and I've got to make dinner and do all these things by myself. It's a lot. Absolutely, it's a lot. I don't think you were meant to do life on your own. We were meant to be in community. So seek it out, be intentional. It might even start with some mom's meetup or something, but find people who are your tribe, as they say. And I do think we were meant to live like that. I think loneliness can be more detrimental to our health. And I know it is, even from studies they've done, than cigarette smoking. So instead of, worrying about those things, like let's find ways to connect and touch one another and connect in ways that are significant and profound.
I love that. And you did touched on one of the questions I wanted to leave us with, but being on the inside of the truth as we are, and having so many guests on your podcast that really have made it their mission to convey the truth and at all costs. Knowing that we're not quite out of the bag yet from 2020 and that there's more in store, what do you center yourself and ground yourself on? Obviously, spirit is such an important piece for me as well. But what are some of the core tenets that you hold? Knowing that there are potential more shenanigans, in the loop and on the way.
Fear and anxiety really depress the immune system function. So I am very careful, just like I am about the food I put in my body. I'm very intentional and careful about what I let into my mind and spirit. So I know there are difficult things happening in the Middle East, especially right now as we're recording this podcast. And I've only watched like a snippet of one video, and then I was like, I've got to move on. Not because I don't care. Get me right. Hear me out here. I do care, but I don't think we were intended to carry the burden of things that are happening on the other side of the planet as individuals. In other words, our media is blaring loud and strong when there are natural disasters and man-made violence and all these things all over the place all the time. And in the tribes I visited, they have no idea what's happening in the broader world. Their concern is to get the food for their children on the plate, or to, go milk the yak. They're not thinking about these things. And in a way, Kyle, I think that's a secret to a lighter spirit. And then because they're happier, as some of my friends put it, they're vibrating on a higher frequency, which I think will help the people in the places of natural and man-made disasters. So what I'm getting at is I don't watch a lot of the news or let it into my mind and spirit, because I do want to be informed. So I do get just a snippet of something. Sometimes it's just through audio. And then I'm like, okay, I hear that. Not sure I believe it. And then I focus on the good stuff that does lift my spirit so that I can be at that frequency or at that level that is emanating love and light. Because what good is it for me to be cast down and sorrowful and anxious with my family, whom I can influence? Is not helping them, and it's not helping the people on the other side of the planet. So this is hard. It might sound easy, but get me right here. I'm not sticking my head in the sand. I am aware of what's happening, but I also don't buy everything I see and hear. But so number one, I'm cautious about it. Number two, I'm skeptical of it. And number three, I make sure to focus on what's good and true and honorable and pure and lovely and right. So for me, that's stuff in the Bible, that's stuff from books that I definitely believe in and recommend, like, Nourishing, Traditions, Nutrition, Physical Degeneration. And I'm constantly reading and discerning, but I use my best judgment. And I also would say, and this is a secret I learned from Australia, it's not easy for me to do because I'm a girl on the go, but one of the Aboriginal women I encountered said to me, in our culture, we have a tradition of Didiri, which is deep listening. And so we get still and we listen. And I was like, okay, this sounds beautiful. And my one friend told me, my Aboriginal friend said, I was going to be a hairdresser until I was still and I listened and I paid attention to my dreams also. And she said they guided me to this land. And now she has custodianship over acres and acres of land that were once occupied by her Inangai people. And the Bible says, be still and know that I am God. So I'm like, if we are still, Kyle, we'll be able to discern between right and wrong, between good and evil, between what's true and what's false. We need to tap into our intuition, and part of it is being still. And it's not easy, as I said, but I think it's important, because that way we'll be able to have our heads screwed on right when the world does go to pot. Like, we'll know who we are and whose we are, and we'll be able to manage the chaos. And I think that's what helps me in the meantime. I'm like, okay, I know who I am. I know whose I am. I'm not going to let all this other stuff get to me. And I'm going to bring the most positive energy and love and light to the people closest to me.
I love that. It's an excellent spin on the serenity prayer, because you are focusing on the things that you can control. And it seems like you do have the wisdom to know the difference. So I applaud you for that. It's been awesome having you on. Where can people find you and get more from you?
Yeah, so they can go to my Holistic Hilda website. I have some offerings there. I've got a Holistic Hilda YouTube channel, and I'm all over Instagram, Holistic Hilda. And of course, they can listen to the Wise Traditions podcast, where I lift up guests like you do, and it's just so much fun. I hope people will enjoy it there too.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. We'll have you back on in the future. It was great having you on.
Thanks, Kyle. Good to see you.
Absolutely.